Hello, good morning again. Welcome to the second part of our morning session. Today, the topic of this session is information organization for the digital humanities. Although we have three speakers for today, we are going to excuse Dr. Walter Scholger from the University of Graz, who has given his presentation on the first day on Wednesday of the seminar, and who was unable to come and present his lecture today. However, he's going to record his lecture, and it will be mounted on the website. Now, I would like to pass the floor to our next speaker, who you already introduced, Dr. Ana Vukadin. And then I think that after these two talks, we can take questions together for both speakers, because they complement each other. So Ana Vukadin, Dr. Ana Vukadin works as Bibliographic Standards and Metadata Officer in the National and University Library of Zagreb. She is the current editor-in-chief, which means the sole author of the rules for description and access to resources in libraries, archives, and museums, of which she's going to talk to us today. Her areas of interest include bibliographic conceptual models, ontologies, authority control, controlled vocabularies, and semantic interoperability across the library, archives, and museum community. She has authored the book Metadata from Transmedia Resources and is member of some international bodies. So, Anna, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Hello, everyone, and thank you for having me here today. I'm really sorry I couldn't be there with you on site as planned, but I hope you're enjoying your time in Zadar and the view, and I hope to see you sometime soon. So I'm going to share my screen now. I hope this will. Can you see it? Okay. Yes. Okay. So my talk, I guess it will fit in the metadata area, metadata part of the knowledge organization in DH. I'm going to talk about the new Croatian national cataloging code and about its possible use in the digital information environment. So we keep calling it cataloging code because the idea of it was born within the library community, and it was born out of the need to update our current national standard. But in fact, it's not meant only for library cataloging. It's really a data content standard intended for use in all types of cultural heritage institutions. So it's not only for libraries, but for museums and archives as well. And in fact, its name, its acronym, KAM, stands for Knjižnice, Arhivi, Muzeji, or libraries, archives, and museums. So it means the same thing as the LAM. And the story about the KAM manual begins in 2014, where the project was officially launched. And the final version of the text has been published this year in June and is available online. This is the homepage. The project involved 9 institutions, among which libraries, museums, archives, but also documentation centers and professional associations and university departments, including the Department for Information Sciences here in Zadar. So one goal of this project was to develop a tool for description that can be applied to diverse kinds of heritage objects like publications on all kinds of on all kinds of media, but also archival documents and cultural artifacts and even natural history objects. And another goal was to provide a model for connecting information about these objects across institutions and across communities. So first, let's take a look at the first goal, which was to provide a tool for description of various kinds of resources. So the question is why? Why should all resources be included in the same manual? Well, we know that library collections don't consist only of publications. Libraries also hold archival material and even cultural objects. And on the other hand, publications are not only, can be found not only in libraries, but also in archives and museums, maybe for different reasons or maybe in a different context than in library institutions, but they are stored there as well. And besides, there are kinds of resources that are so-called boundary objects. These are the objects that are not really typical or central for any particular kind of institution. They are not prototypes, to use the term from the prototype theory of categorization, but can equally be found in all kinds of heritage institutions. For example, photographs or maps or video recordings, manuscripts, posters, and so on. So library material, archival material, museum objects, these are not really fixed categories. Maybe they are fixed in the context of business needs of some particular institution, but outside that frame, they really tend to overlap. And this is why we wanted to create a manual that would help practitioners describe resources regardless of the holding institution, simply to describe a book as a book using a minimal mandatory set of elements from bibliographic standards, or to describe, for example, a personal archival fond using a minimal mandatory set of elements from archival standards. No matter where this book or this font are actually stored. And of course, each institution can then further add other optional data elements to express institutional context if need be. And last but not least, all three types of institutions digitize their resources and maintain digital repositories. And I have to point out, although I think we all already know this very well, that digital objects are definitely boundary objects because the requirement for their description and management are very similar, regardless of the institution of their provenance. And since many digital collections and repositories start off as digital scholarship projects, it's here that I see this important connection and intersection between digital humanities and our metadata manual. And another possibility provided by digital tools and well, by the World Wide Web in general, is the possibility to establish relationships between resources coming from different institutions. So here we have an example of a letter which was written by the Croatian modernist writer Ivo Vojnović and addressed to his father, Kosta, who was also a prominent figure of his time. He was a politician and a lawyer. So this letter is held at the Croatian State Archive and is a part of the Vojnović family fund. But it also it has also been published as a part of a multi-volume book, which aggregated all the correspondence of Ivo Vojnović. And this edition is held in several libraries, among which also National and University Library. So for someone interested in correspondence of Ivo Vojnović, resource discovery is inherently cross-institutional And it should be the task of the institutions should be to provide some kind of roadmap for this discovery. Of course, it raises many issues, many interoperability issues in the first place. First of all, technical interoperability issues, which are probably the hardest to tackle, but also semantic interoperability issues and questions of understanding each other's data. And that can be achieved, that could be achieved if everybody used the same semantic framework. So it was our ambition to create such a framework. So how did we do it? First, we analyzed 3 principal conceptual data models produced by heritage communities. IFLA library reference model for libraries, records in context or RIC for archives, and we also consulted SciDoc CRM, which originated in the museum community and is the norm for interchange of cultural heritage information. Then we proceeded by mapping these schemes and trying to harmonize their entities. And the result was that we identified 4 main entities that were implicitly or explicitly found in all the models. And these are resource, agent, place, and time span. And one of the most important principles that was guiding us during the development of this manual was the principle of functional granularity. The notion of functional granularity emerged from the index project in the late 1990s, and it was underpinned by large-scale digitization that was going on at this time. And functional granularity is actually the idea that a well-formed metadata scheme should provide a way of identifying any possible part or version of a document that is required by some practical need. So any well-formed metadata scheme should be able to describe anything from a particular sentence in a text document to an entire collection of documents. So following our conceptual models that I mentioned before and the principle of functional granularity, we further subdivided the entity resource into work, which is a conceptual aspect of a resource, and manifestation, which is a physical aspect of a resource. And we have seen just now how this distinction is useful in the example of a letter, which exists in its original handwritten form in an archive, but is also published in a printed book. And this distinction is also crucial for the management of digitized resources and their originals, which are 2 manifestations of the same work. And the distinction work manifestation corresponds to record and instantiation in RIC, and we also introduced further aspects, expression and item for bibliographic needs. These were taken from IFLA LRM. On the other hand, now it's talking about the aspect of description. On the other hand, it was also necessary to make it possible to describe a resource at various levels, from collection of objects to a component of an object. So by combining these 2 sets of categories, aspect and level, these 2 facets, we could say so, it should be possible to describe any resource at any needed level of granularity. For example, it would be possible to express that a certain digital image has been created by scanning a certain illustration contained in a particular item of a particular edition of a book or a magazine. And I also have to add, although I don't have a slide to show this, that the entity agent is also subdivided into persons, corporate bodies, and families. And we still have to decide when or if we are going to introduce other types of agents, such as mechanisms and functions, which are characteristic of archival models. So the structure of the KAM manual revolves around 4 entities that can be further subdivided. And the main menu, when you visit the page and when you explore the manual, the main menu consists of a list of data elements that are properties of these entities, and they're grouped in chapters according to the entities they belong to. For example, this element, this is the element identifier for a person. It is in the chapter 7 with other properties of a person. And like all the other elements, it has its name explicated, a definition, a domain. It says whether it's mandatory or optional. This one is mandatory if available. It says whether it's repeatable or not. This one is repeatable because a person can have more than one identifier. And there is also a scope note and the role of the element in the description. So it says what it is for, which user need it covers. This one covers the need to identify a person related to a resource. So each data element in the scheme contains this information and is followed by rules and stipulations about how to record the value of the element and from which sources it should be taken and so on. And I would like to stress out once more that this is a data content standard. So it prescribes the content of metadata, which means it prescribes the meaning and value of metadata, and it doesn't say anything about the actual format of data. So it's possible to apply the rules in many different formats for processing data, from XML-based formats to MARC formats and linked data formats such as RDF serializations and so on. And it's also important to say that the goal of this project was not only to enable communication within the Croatian heritage sector, but also to enable communication with other institutions and services at the international level. For example, in order to be able to exchange library, bibliographic, and authority data with libraries outside Croatia, we paid special attention to align our scheme to RDA, which is increasingly becoming an international standard, and also to ISBD and other IFLA standards. And in order to maintain interoperability, we have drafted an ontology. The draft was created by Professor Mirna Viller, and we are currently working on this ontology, and we are planning to develop namespace registry and publish it in the namespace registry if we get the funding for this. And the subject of ontology brings us to the subject of linked data, which brings us to digital collaboration. And we've heard yesterday, in yesterday's presentations here at the conference, that the relationship between digital library and digital scholarship is not about service, but about collaboration. So in 1990s, with the emergence of the internet, many professional articles were written that from today's perspective seem a bit, well, seem cute, really. In which librarians proposed how to catalog the internet and how to classify the internet. And I would say that today librarians have not given up this idea of cataloging the internet, but today they are very well aware that this can happen only through collaborative practices and through partnership and alignment of various models of data and models of knowledge. So as a conclusion, I would like to shortly argue possible benefits of collaboration between digital scholarship projects and heritage institutions in the metadata domain. And I'm taking the example from the book Korlika mentioned before. This is really the example from the paper I co-wrote for this book with my colleague Tamara Štefanec, who is an archivist at the National Library. And the example is a research repository that contains digital materials about the history of one of the oldest bookstores in Croatia, which is the Morpurgo bookstore in Split. So the scholar who researched the history of this bookstore, Nada Topic, in the course of her research, she collected and digitized a couple of hundred of sources, which served her purpose as research data. And these were photographs, letters, books, archival documents, and other kinds of resources. And eventually she published them all in a privately curated open access repository. And of course, the originals are held in libraries, museums, and archives. And they're accompanied by a minimal set of metadata. And now, if both heritage institutions and repositories, such as this one, use the same metadata framework, same metadata scheme, and if they were able to link their metadata via URIs, it would have several benefits for all the stakeholders included. Heritage institutions would gain insight into how and where their resources are used, in which context they are researched, and maybe the presence and the link with repositories such as this one could increase interest in the originals and make these institutions and their collections more visible. And on the other hand, links to institutional resources would confirm reliability and trustworthiness of digital repository data. And last but not least, users would get more information than provided by each of these services alone. And they would also gain insight into the contexts in which resources of their interest have been researched so far. So with this, I will conclude this talk. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Very much, both Anna and Korelka. I think you have opened a very important topic, and I hope there will be some questions for you, especially because you want to situate, as you say, information organization topics and the necessity of information organization topics into the context of digital humanities. Are there any questions here in the room for our speakers? I do not see any questions online. Sorry. Question? Yes, please.
Hello, thanks a lot for both presentations. Can you hear me? I would like to ask you both, because and how I would like to have your input on how in your environments with existing staff allocation, with the new demands on archives, libraries, especially in the IT sector, who is handling this sort of work currently? How are you training these people? And what are your visions for the future in terms of new generations of these profiles? Is this something that is already being taught in curricula at university programs?
Anna, would you like to say?
Well, I can talk from the perspective of practitioner in a heritage institution. I think that the trends are definitely going into in the direction of blurring the boundaries between heritage institutions, at least from the user's point of view, maybe not from the business points of view. Of course, each institution and each type of institution has their own needs and processes and workflows. But at this level of presenting our resources to the user, I think it is definitely going this way, and of course, with all these possibilities to connect information. However, it all depends on the funding we get. And usually there are many budget restraints, and it's very hard to compete with other technological solutions developed by other sectors. So I think that what I've noticed is that many students, after they graduate, they come into the institution, they come into the library, and they have the knowledge about linked data, about semantic web, about all new models of knowledge organization, about all technical possibilities and so on. And then I think they are kind of disappointed by this gap between the theory and practice. So I think unfortunately, it largely depends on the financial side of the story.
Thank you. Do you have any other following question to this? No, that was all right, the answer.
Oh, I'm sorry, I see the question in the chat.
Yes,
is KAM model somehow inspired or connected with the Europeana data model? Well, we are working on aligning it with this model too, and it is compatible with it. Europeana data model is more simple. It's simpler. It has less elements, but yes, they are compatible.
So here we are talking about interoperability and with models or standards of specific projects, European in this case. Is there any other anyone else perhaps? Perhaps I would like to ask you, perhaps both in a way, and this is something that I raised in my presentation, and this is the issue of information representation. And of course, linked to that, you said bias. In my presentation, I was citing two DH specialists talking in this respect, using the words politics and norms used by institutions. So would you perhaps comment on that? Because I think this is also something that is extremely relevant today, and it's a very hot topic. Also in our field, if you describe a document, you are describing according to certain politics and norms that are valid, and in a certain language that is valid at this particular place and time under in a special community, etc., and is in fact reflects that context, so to say. So have you also touched that issue more in your and I think this is relevant for digital humanities scholars. What do they find in the description of an object? How do they read it? Is this document trustworthy? Yes. Yes, thank you. You have mentioned, I think, a very important word, and this is provenance. If we put metadata or metadata, stating the provenance of our metadata, that can be some kind of stamp on the work we are doing, and a kind of valued information for the user of that metadata, for the researcher, so that he would know where the data comes from. Anna, would you like to comment that, perhaps?
No, it's a very, very interesting topic, and it's very much in focus, really, because now when we are able to communicate with each other on such a grand scale, now everybody's voice is heard, and many knowledge organization systems which are very which have been established are brought into questions, or some of their aspects are brought into question. Their representation, their ability to represent certain communities or perspectives is being brought into question. But I think it's a good thing that there is a possibility to build thesauri or knowledge systems that are based on a perspective of certain community, and then network them, connect them to other more well-known systems like, I don't know, Library of Congress subject headings and so on. And this is then what we are provided with is a better insight into all different perspectives and all different points of view that exist in naming something, in organizing something. I think it's a good thing, and it's very important what you said, that the provenance of data is explicated, so that we know who said what, who thinks what, and it's really a step on this path of mutual communication.
I would like somehow to draw, it's a direct association for me to Professor Tadic, this lecture this morning, talking about language translation and the specific domains. You can do that in a specific domain. If you know the specific domain, you can fix your definition within that domain. And the leaf would mean one thing in anatomy, in medicine, or in botany, or wherever. So I think that in one way, as we are trying to be global, open to everything, on the other hand, if we do not focus our tools on identities, on the identities of the domain, and describe it in its own language, then we are losing the real meaning of what we are describing, what we are having, and are misunderstood and won't function. At least that's perhaps Professor Tadic could comment on that.
I certainly can. Thank you very much for this, pointing this out. We can go in further and try to look at it from a philosophical point of view. And quote the Wittgenstein, of my language or boundaries of my world.
Yes.
But to that you can have a very simple. That would be true, then translation would not be possible.
Yes, we wouldn't be able to communicate.
And how come that we manage to translate? It needs a lot of training, that's true. You need to know not just one language, many languages. It's even better if you know more than. But certainly, at least you should learn the distributional rules of certain meanings of certain forms. And this is just a strict structuralist view on linguistic structuralism view on what actually is now today tried to be covered with language models, computer language models. So if you talk about word embeddings or similar language models, BERT, what that has been introduced by Google a few years ago. In this respect, these approaches are trying to mimic the way we as humans use the language. Okay, I'm not telling that we are with this method we are coming any closer to what could be called computer language understanding. I would always put it in quotes because just had a discussion with yesterday with Benedict. In order to have a full understanding, you need to have the retroflex of your consciousness. So you have to become self-conscious to be able to understand. So this is also mimicking computer understanding, but it helps us a lot. It saves us a lot of time for us humans to try to overcome this, I would say, flood of information that we are exposed to every day, every single moment. And instead of, what Americans would say, gone fishing, forget it, I'm not in the flow. We have, every decent Croatian guy has 2 mobile phones, not one, like the one is not enough. And that's terrible. So we are every day exposed. You have a flood of emails. And if only we could have an intelligent system that would say, okay, this is your domain, which you're interested in. And then you can have analysis of contents of mails and sort them out, classify them automatically. Say, okay, these are very important. These I will answer tomorrow. And these are, burning ones. Okay. 30 years ago, this job was done by secretaries.
Yeah.
If you do it today, you hand it to a secretary, and the people that you're exchanging correspondence with may get offended that you didn't reply yourself. And yet, how many hours a day you lose on just answering the mail? A good part of that mail could have been answered by someone who doesn't have that level of education that society invested in you. Mm-hmm. And you are actually not. You're losing your time of extremely high educated person for something that could be done by a high school educated person, unfortunately. So computers do not always help us. They even puts a lot of overburden to us. So what we need to do, we need to have intelligent systems that could, for instance, recognize domains. And for that, I believe the ontological approaches that we are opening, and there's a lot of linked open data available. Look at the linked open data cloud itself. That could really help us to somehow define our own domains in our personal and professional life and say, well, these are domains that I'm interested in. And this then, I'm coming back to the beginning, this then reflects in our language, in our own language. Okay? And Leaf is a very nice example. I have another beautiful example. It's the noun charge in English. So if you use it in a military context, then it's assault, or it's the filling up of cannons. If you use it in a legal context, then it's indictment. Okay. completely different meaning and completely different translations into other languages. Let alone the differences between Anglo-Saxon common law and the French continental law. That's the other level of problem of terminology. But it's just the different languages would have different words for these different meanings. And you're absolutely right, but we need to build language tools today, and computing facilities have advanced enough regarding, so we need to build language processing tools that are very much observant on the domain of the usage of words and their meanings.
Yes, thank you very much. Is there anything else, Anna, you would like to add or comment?
No, I agree. I think it's a question that's wider than knowledge organization and digital humanities. I mean, today the question of information representation, when we have social networks and when we have personalized Google, and when we are very well able to see only information that we want to see or that we will like, it's really a question of ethics in information organization. I think that knowledge organization systems and thesauri are just one part of it. It's really the question of yeah, it's an ethical question of the information age.
Thank you very much. You have reminded me now of a paper we had at one of the archives, libraries, and museum seminar about the ethics in librarianships and ethics of information sciences. And it was written by a philosopher. And thanks to that, he became quite unwelcome to the information, to this sector with his ideas. So I think I'm going back to that paper and read it. So thank you very much. I think we can say this morning session was very interesting, and we've learned a lot, and I think we connected a lot, and thank you very much to our speakers and those who made comments or put questions. So let's thank them all and all of you for so now we have a lunch break until 4 o'clock. So see you all at, sorry, 4 o'clock, it's 14. See at 2 o'clock. So see you again at 2 o'clock in the afternoon.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.